Well, Flemming, it's so nice to meet you. Thank you for stopping by the UTSOA and presenting some of your work. And as a co-founder of Tredje Natur, am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, a Third Nature, just call us Third Nature, but
Third
it's
Nature.
pretty good.
Okay, all right. Well, my name is Martin Janssens. I am an MArch student here at the University of Texas at Austin School of Architecture. And this is part of the Goldsmith interview series, which
Hmm.
precedes your lecture at the university, which is sponsored by Dean Addington here. Um, and I have to say I was caught a little off guard when looking at your work and some of your research, because it's hard to, as an MArch student, really figure out the boundary of where the architecture begins and the urban planning begins for your work. And that's sort of a theme for all of the lectures, actually. So I don't know why I should have been so caught off
Why
guard.
that was surprising, yeah.
Yeah, but considering that, I think where, maybe to turn that into a question, right? Where does the role of architect begin and end with you nowadays? Like, what is the usefulness of the term architect?
Well, it's a good question, and I'm not sure I'm really the right guy to answer that, because we've set out this business and this hope for well, the profession of the architect to actually just bridge gaps between profession, but also bridge gaps in the whole idea of the architect, sort of someone sitting, with the ruler and you're doing the sort of the godlike minimalistic design or whatever it is that people have as an impression of an architect. If you think of Mies van der Rohe or some of the big A architects, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm opposed to that notion in terms of the quality of work we do here, but I think we basically try to jump at anything that has some kind of physical tangibleness, or if that's even a word. It's late in the evening here, but something that we can concretely and professionally can somehow push into a direction that we feel it performs more. And then you ask in performs more on what parameters, and we are engaging, from the smallest component of the city to in this large, huge, complex master plans and resiliency projects. And but what is a constant, at least at Third Nature, is the hope and the ambitions to actually come somewhere closer to a more agreeable situation between nature and culture, or architecture and the resources we use, or the uses and the ability architecture can enable them in new ways, basically, to live a more joyful but also more sustainable life. So we don't really. I think we're quite aware of the boundaries and where to push, but ideally we are into putting stuff together, and that does not really work well with the classical notion of building architect or urban planner or industrial design even.
I think that gets me to what you've decided to call your firm, Third Nature, which there's the, I don't want to say it's the trope of the manifesto of architects, right? That they set out to do something and they define the points and they try to stick to that. But your name seemed almost like your manifesto.
Mm.
Is that sort of correct? Can you elaborate a little bit on how you went to choose that name?
After numerous considerations or abbreviations of Flemming and Ole's architectural studio, or Ole is my co-founder and friend that we started the office with, and we thought we had the idea actually to be sort of like urbanist ghostwriters in the beginning, to be completely non-phased. Also maybe commemorating Daft Punk, who actually decided to pull the plug today.
Yeah,
But it shouldn't be about architects. It should be about architecture and content, and we wanted to get rid of that sort of whole it's sort of fetishizing the idols of architecture. But also, it was also just to raise the question, and the name Third Nature. I mean, I can't really say that we know how to answer what is the question of Third Nature, but we try in each of our projects to discuss where are we going with this. And the elevator speech of Third Nature is that, obviously when we think about nature, we have sort of an image of the Garden of Eden, or the endless resources that we base our culture on. And as it happens, particularly in the last 20, even or last couple of decades, we've completely expanded our industrialized activities and are expanding our cities and our resource consumption into this sort of mindless second nature, you could say, a more cultural based or machinic type of a nature. And Third Nature is kind of like the hope and the cry out for some kind of balance between the two. I was actually the other day reminded that in English you have the expression "a second nature" to you as something that you get good at something or comfortable with something, and it becomes second nature with you. And in that sense, it also raises some question, because we have to do something that is maybe not really, maybe that is actually lost to us, an agreeable, believable, sound, understandable relation to everything that is important in this world: resource understanding, social capacity, micro and macro climatic conditions, resource consumption, etc. So all these things are something that we try to reestablish or relearn in some ways through our projects.
Who are you talking to then? When you're starting your projects, if it's an architecture project, I can sort of understand. You enter an architecture competition or you speak to a client, but with these sort of broader ideas of even something like your climate tile, like who are you speaking to get those ideas off the ground and actually implemented in places like Copenhagen?
Well, you have to have a lot of narratives to get through to actually realizing architecture, but ultimately we're talking to the users of the city, the end users, and that's our primary target. There's been I think the last couple of decades there's been a discourse and a discussion that something happens with architecture students as they enter school, and they somehow sort of disengage with their initial thoughts of and ambitions that, or the way they kind of like figured they would work with architects, and the big why as to why I'm entering architecture school, and you sort of disembark from that and go through academia and go to all kinds of scenarios and self-image as an architect. And there's been a particularly maybe in the 80s with the postmodernism and deconstructivism, or even structuralism before that has been sort of a detachment to what is actually a livable, agreeable, welcoming space, and a more the machine is maybe more present, and the sort of the whimsical, or the hyper academic activities were really, really strong when I was a student, and I wouldn't say that I didn't enjoy that, and really sort of getting into the depth of constructing things in a drawing and that whole academic discourse. But it is also a matter of fact that there's an animosity towards some architects and some architecture that has completely failed in terms of engaging people, and I just feel maybe we're potentially missing out in our cities because of this sort of detachment, or this over academic approach somehow, and I think we try to really focus on the end user and try to do something. I mean, it's not the business of pleasing, but it is a business of inviting into a discourse, or inviting into a reflection through engagement with architecture.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the idea of education, because I guess, you know, I'm in my last semester now, so I'm right at the cusp of being in education and moving away from it. And I've gotten different responses from different lecturers over the series as to the amount of, or sort of the place of where this reform should happen in terms of things like sustainability. Should it be coming from the professors, or should it be a bottom-up approach from the students demanding a sort of action? So I'd be interested in hearing your take on you know, how you think maybe pedagogy should be reformed, or education, how you see education shaping the field in the next 10 years or so.
Mm. Well, I see a lot of good tendencies and a lot of sort of down to earth approaches to really, almost planet scale generic global problems. I see a richness in both the sort of the from professor level, but also from student level, and I think there's a really fruitful transition going on in these years. I'm mainly thinking about some of the thesis students I censor in the academy here in Copenhagen and in Denmark in general, but also, I mean, globally there seems to be sort of a waking up and sort of like, let's get rid of this super academic distant sort of discussion about the whole Eisenman kind of like super academic appreciation of semantics of space, etc., and actually just look at the goddamn huge footprint we have on the planet. And I mean, wake up and let's deal with that at least before we go nuts with the esoteric drawing exercises. And I'm not saying that it has to be sort of one is at the cost of losing the other, but I think I'm really seeing a lot of effort being put into re-engaging with the sort of the whole societal and the planetary impact that architecture and the city and the sort of the globalized activities of the city have on the whole planetary balance. We at the academy in Copenhagen, I think they were one of the first to engage with the UN SDGs to really put that on. This is what we want. There's a call here. There's a framework with a lot of blanks in it. Just get cracking and just start start anywhere basically. And I've seen that mature more and more into both large scale and very super qualified architectural approaches. Without saying, well, it's not about just hugging trees or stuff like that. It doesn't qualify in itself that you're trying to save the planet, but are you actually pushing also the upper bar for the academic impact of this environmental holistic approach as a starting point.
Yeah, and it's also interesting, maybe to feed off of that comment, to hear different architects sort of contemporary approaches to the word sustainability. Like, sustainability isn't really used as a sort of term now because it's almost too cliche, it's too broad, it's too large of an idea. And so I wonder in your firm how you guys tackle that, how you break it down into different concepts, like third nature itself as a
Well, I think this third nature was also an idea to get rid of that whole. We have to sort of start a new language or a new. Start somewhere where you don't instantly get a locked image of it. There was a Danish newspaper. I think it closed down 10, 15 years ago, but they the editor of the newspaper said, well, next time I see someone picturing environmentalism with a photo of the planet or the globe, I'm gonna sort of sack him and kick him out because it's over exhausted. And I think we talk about sustainability. It's so exhausted as well, but it's also what I find a lot of times is, and when we are increasingly working in other nations, and I always ask, what do you mean by carbon neutral? Because or fossil free, or is it only process energy, but is also embodied carbon? Is it also what is it actually talking about? And the number of definitions to this whole discourse. I mean, it's as many as the times I've asked people are different practices nationally around where we have our projects ongoing. And so I mean, I like the word circular, but again, I also dislike it because it's sort of like a processual movement, or it's more like a spiraling movement. I think that's how I see you're kind of like layering, and it's a sedimental thing, and you're also creating stuff. That type of movement, I also feel is maybe how I think about our practice and about architecture, because you have to realize that architecture has always been tied closely with destruction, destruction of resources, transforming it into these cultural objects, and you see sort of the degradation or the deterioration of it. It doesn't really go back and become a resource again. Mm-hmm. We use nature-based a lot in our sort of resiliency projects, which is also kind of, you know, tongue-in-cheek, because, you know, you almost feel ashamed of taking the word nature in your mouth, but nevertheless, it's very practical. But lastly, I've lately, in these last couple of years, I've been using regenerative, because regenerative is where you really need to go. It has to regenerate. It has to be some kind of balance between using and, you know, taking. So creation and destruction has to be balanced somehow, and that is, in my mind, a regenerative approach. And but being able to deliver that, you know, I think is a long haul from now into the next many decades, really.
Yeah, if we're talking about the future, I think there was an interview that you recently did with Polis magazine. I think it's a German publication, where you mentioned that designers have to see our work as part of a fruitful dialogue between the past, present, and the future. And I think that last part is often not seen as a dialogue. It's often seen as somebody else's problem down the line. So, you know, I guess my question is that how long are you looking into the future then? Are you looking into 10 years, 20 years? Because with things like climate change, with things like political unrest, it's very hard to anticipate what's going to happen beyond a decade from now. And so how do you bring that into your work, and what are the different timeline scales you're looking at?
Well, it's interesting because I mean time is notoriously tied with architecture, and I mean practically some of the master plans we're doing, that's 50, 70 years, you know, in front of us, and we're starting to dig now, and we know that, I mean, it's going to be a continuous process to qualify these initial ideas of how would this city work, or how would this huge master plan unfold. But it's also dawned on me that, I mean, there is this saying, and I think this is for marketing, that you know, culture eats strategy for breakfast, and I think you can strategize so much, but I think why things are so sticky and so slow sometimes, and I think they are on many levels, it is because of culture. It is something that will have to come from, you know, within the societies, within the users, or it really has to make sense on a lot of parameters before people would actually change their behavior or appreciate the mindset or the payoff of a certain strategy of decarbonizing or rewilding or whatever it is. And this sort of cultural shift is not really, I mean, we talk about the transition as if it's overnight we're gonna wear a green hat instead of a black one, but I think it's look at where the city was 10 years ago or 50 years ago or 100 and 200 years ago, and a lot of the European cities we work in, they have ties, you know, a couple of thousand years back, but practically a lot of the buildings are 200, 300, 400 years old. So I mean, and imagine when these buildings were built, when, I mean, the whole idea of even a bike or a you know, a car or, you know, plumbing or all these kind of things, they weren't really in place. And a lot of, I mean, positively, a lot of the big drivers, for instance, plumbing, was driven out of, I mean, plumbing was specifically, and sanitation was specifically driven out of the the cholera epidemic, which was a huge, I mean, threat to the city as a concept. I mean, you're basically, living in the city and you would deteriorate or even get killed to a large extent. But also, if you look over time, the rapidness in which cities can change and sort of address these huge issues, makes me positive. So I think actually we can go a lot in terms of, I mean, the next 10 years, I think we'll see a lot of solid resiliency projects. But I think the whole decarbonizing, that is going to be a much more tricky thing. And I'm looking at, well, at least 30 years from now before I think we really substantially are getting somewhere. And I think and I fear it will be as a response to a lot of more crises rather than as a response to the knowledge that we have already.
Mm-hmm. Well, very optimistic words, but also with some realism, I think, which is always nice to straddle that balance. Flemming, thank you so much for answering a few of my questions, and I'll let you get to the lecture series here at the UTSOA. So maybe in the future we'll see each other in person. I hope to go to Copenhagen one day. But it might be a while given the circumstances.
It's probably after the summer break, I think, but
yeah.
But soon, hopefully. Okay, great talk to you,
Okay.
Martin. Yeah, it's a pleasure. Bye.
Bye.